today we are here for an event which is called Strategic Foresight for Service Design, and it's with my mate, Pascal Wicht. And why are we doing these types of events? And what is this service design network thing? And what does it do for you? Basically, it's very simple. The service design network is here to help you with events, jobs, and knowledge. But let's dive a little bit more into that. So the first thing, it helps you maybe, hopefully, to find your next job. So we have a discussion board where we kind of try to track every new service design job that's happening in Switzerland, which is always good if you want to come to Switzerland and eat some good chocolate. That's always a good way to eat the chocolate. And you see there a few of the companies that we already tracked jobs from, which are related to service design. That's one thing we do. We also help you meet other service design nerds at events. And, you know, maybe, who knows, you might find the love of your life also. That's not a promise. And you see it, it's in the fine print. We can't promise that, but we can promise that you will meet some nerdy people, some strange people like Pascal and me. That's for sure. And one thing that we try also to do, especially with events like today, is also to help you grow your knowledge and your expertise. And again, not a promise, but it could happen, is that it helps you to show off during dinner parties, which is always also something which is quite nice. So that's basically what we're trying to do with the Service Design Network here in Switzerland. And obviously, if you want to know more about the upcoming events, we have also a few reports and content. You can just Google SDN Switzerland and you'll be good to go. That's it for a bit of the introduction. And now I'm very excited to start with you on the topic of strategic foresight for service design. And you'll see, we'll try to cover these few questions. But as Pascal is a good old friend, it's going to be basically like a conversation in the bar. We will start somewhere and we don't know where we will end up. And that's perfectly okay for us. So let me show you our dear Pascal. So Pascal, I told you already welcome before, but I think it's, again, a good time to thank you so much for the time that you're spending tonight for the community. I'm extremely happy for that. I'm grateful for that. And yeah, I'm excited about the conversation.
Thanks, man.
But before we start, maybe, can you share a bit, you know, who are you, man?
So thanks. I'm very happy to spend some time with you and the audience. So I'm Swiss. I'm from the French side of Switzerland. I have a few years of design behind me, almost 30 years. It's been a while. And in my career, I have started as a graphic designer. I started then UX, branding. And as I went along with my career, I worked more and more into advising clients and working really upstream of design briefs. What should we do? How should we do it? Why should we do it? And that's how I started since, I would say, 2005, 2006, practicing foresight, strategic foresight, and trying to think about change, trying to think about the future. And that's how I'm here today to talk about that. I call myself a strategic designer today, meaning I work really, like I said, upstream of design briefs. I mix different methods and disciplines in order to make sense of problems, explore different issues. What should be the company or the client thinking about for tomorrow? And I tend to do this from a very qualitative field research perspective. So that's a bit who I am. I currently work in a very big company, very secret. I don't want to say too much, but I work in the B2G. So I work a lot with governments. And I'm quite happy to do this with you. It's nice. Thanks, man.
Thank you so much. I like how we already have a glimpse of Switzerland in this, you know, like big government, you know, secretive at the same time, but at the same time also this very just lovely aspect of qualitative aspect
Yeah. One thing about my life is that I've spent since I'm 4 years old a lot of time in Africa. And that has really, I would say, defined my perspective on the world. I grew up surrounded by political activists, refugees, deserters, people who refused to do the army in South Africa. So very early, my political imaginaries, without knowing it, were structured by images like Mandela, Palestine, colonization. And I realized that very late in my life that I wasn't like other kids, and that I had grown up with these ideas. And I spent quite a lot of time in Asia as well. My wife is from Vietnam. I live with a lot of Vietnamese, so I've always been in different cultures. Now I live with 3 generations at home. And I think there's a strong sense of anthropology somehow in my life. And we'll see during the discussion, but that aspect of going into the field and trying to articulate my thinking to what is actually happening in front of me, rather than relying on data or more quantitative aspects of research, has always been a key issue for me. So that's a little bit my way of doing design.
Thank you. I think people will be excited to chat even more on LinkedIn or somewhere else where they will find you. And there is much more weirdness to discover about you, because I will just throw a few of the things, but Pascal is one of the few person that also know what it is to live in a family where there are pastors. So that's also kind of a bit of a weird background.
Yes.
Being in Swiss villages and in Africa, I think that's also brings a lot of special aspects. You have the Vaud accent that you can really use well. So a lot of weirdness, but we will focus on one weird aspect that I like about you is this strategic foresight thing. And maybe the first question, that I had in the past was, what the fuck is it?
Yeah, sure. It's a weird thing. I'll start with the foresight part and I'll add the strategic. So it's part of I would say, a set of disciplines that we call future studies. And future studies in general is how do we think about the future and what does it mean for us? So you will have elements of prospective psychology. How do human beings think about the future? For example, we're very bad at predicting how we would react emotionally to events in the future. It's called affect forecasting. We're terrible at that. We also tend as humans to, when we think about ourselves in the future, we don't really have a sense of continuity. We imagine ourselves in the future being really different. We'll achieve so many different things and we will have this and that. And that is a psychological bias that almost a cognitive bias, I would say, that makes us do a lot of short-term choices because we have such a disconnect with the future. Whereas if you look at businesses, they have a strong sense of continuity. It will remain the same. Okay, so our relationship with the future is not something that we learn at school. It's not something that our parents teach us. So at the heart of foresight and future studies is really the idea of long-term thinking and opening up the possibilities about the future. And learning that takes a few cognitive adjustments because by default, you don't know how to do it and you need a few methods. And I would say it takes a few years to really get a sense of, 3 years ago, I imagined this. This is how the future played out. I wasn't so far there. I was completely wrong. So becoming a futurist takes time. It's not something out of nowhere. You just have a few methods like a 5-step ideal magic sauce and then you're a designer. Being a futurist takes time. Now, the strategic part is how do you plug that way of thinking to a business in order to shape decisions? So how do you think about the future and then bring it back? Because if we want to make a critique of strategic foresight, which is a discipline that a lot of people will encounter in sort of team building workshops. It's fun to think about the future, throw in some technologies and imagine the future, but there is no structured framework to bring those insights back into the present and impact what are we going to do tomorrow. Yeah. Okay, so that's the strategic part. And strategic foresight would be something that customers may request from an external partner that to guide them and walk them along that path. But I would say it should be a core business function within the strategic office or board, something that the company is doing on themselves. That's much better. So a futurist shouldn't just be giving a fancy talk to kickstart a workshop or an offsite retreat. At some time, a company should have that capability inside. It's much better. And that aspect of what do we do and when do we redo the exercise to start thinking, okay, how are things evolving? Maybe a war just started, the price of energy just went up the roof. We might have a terrible summer, we don't know. So I would say strategic foresight will really help companies address the notion of change and how to behave and position yourself with the idea that the future will change, the future will be different, and how do we navigate that? It's a little bit hard. Great.
Okay. Thanks so much. For me, there is one thing that I really like in your explanation is that it's not just thinking about the future for businesses, but also helping people think differently for the future in general.
Yeah.
And there is one thing that I learned from you, which is you always use the word future in plural form. And there is something interesting to me, which when I bring it back, to parents asking a kid, what do you want to be in the future when you will be big? And usually what we expect is one answer. And I think where my understanding of the foresight guy, he will not ask, what do you want to be? But it's more like, what are the possible jobs you could do in the future, or that you'd like to work on, or that you imagine you could do? Is it a bit this change that happens?
So that's brilliant. You really got it. The number one thing you want to do when you're thinking about the future is to escape what we call the mono future. Okay, this idea of a linear future that unfolds ahead of you, that you will walk into, and there is this continuity. Okay, and that has many implications because adding an S to futures is where everything should be different. So a customer will ask you, I want to do strategic foresight, and then you show up with like 6, 7 different possible futures, and they will go, oh, no, that's not what I wanted. I want you to tell me what will happen. And that's the second thing about futurists, is that we do not provide predictions. Okay. So, for example, in French, we have collapsology. The collapsology is the science and study of how our system will collapse. And for a futurist, that is a no-go. We can't compute that because methodologically or deontologically, we cannot have only one future. Okay. And this notion that the future will unfold in a very specific way cannot be taken into account. We want to have a range of possible futures. Okay. But it's not always easy to escape this idea that the future will be more technology, more progress, better, linear going forward. And that is so strong in the way we think about the future. I always tell my students, you cannot find the future on Unsplash. It doesn't exist. It looks like the past. It is the past. Even if you ask an AI mid-journey to imagine what the future could be, it struggles. Images will be blurry because it doesn't know what should I take into account. Where are my references? So that's where we want to go when we think about the future. And it's very difficult for a company to escape the idea of predictions and the idea of, I would say, techno-driven consumer insights with a scope of 3 to 6 months. That's not strategic foresight. That's consumer research. So it's always very important as a futurist when you're requested to do a research. Do you really want to open up and think, how might tomorrow be different? Okay. What if tomorrow there's something key about your business? It's gone. And some customers will tell you, but that's not possible. Say, okay, try to remember how fast you removed CDs out of your life. How long did it take for you to phase out CDs? And some people will tell you, oh, it took like 1 year. Well, that could be your industry. What would happen? What would you do? How would you reimagine what you're good at in the future where you're good at something, but you don't do it in the same way? That's the basic of a foresight approach to a business strategy. So if you take a business model canvas, you have 9 blocks. You could say, just change 1 block. That one is gone. What could be different? That's sort of the approach. Put an S to future.
I like it because for me, it reminds me, like how in service design work, where often we say, oh, we're going to prototype, and like the worst thing is to make 1 prototype. Yeah. Because we say, but then how do we compare? And then we often say, hey, it's interesting to have 3, 4 very weird and different ideas that we can prototype to see in the extremes where it's interesting. So exactly. I feel there is this notion of, okay, we're going to explore, prototype the future in some way, But what I'm asking now is, for me is, okay, I could imagine, like saying, oh, this is one future that is possible, very optimistic, maybe one which is less optimistic, one which is extremely weird and special. But then how do I make a strategy out of that for a business? Like it's so different. So how do I take it back from, okay, this could happen, and how do I then select, what do I do now? How do I adapt today for these things that might happen?
So one key element of strategic foresight, maybe 3, but they're related, is the idea of horizon scanning, where you try to detect early signs of change, or what we call weak signals. And then you're going to take those weak signals. They might not really seem related directly to your core business, but what you're going to do is you're going to amplify them, just like an audio engineer, amplify that signal and imagine what would be in 5 years, this small signal, what would happen if this would become dominant. So for example, in 2004, I saw a photo of an Asian lady holding a selfie stick. That was the first selfie stick I saw. And she had a digital camera. And I thought, oh, that's very interesting. What would happen if this behavior became dominant? So then, to answer your question, what you want to do here is early detection, early imagination, and early adaptation, early reaction. Now, how to do it would be very different for each type of company. Strategic foresight requires some, I would say, consulting maturity in order to plug it to your customer, because a lot of old men don't like to be told that things could be different, especially 2-3 years before they retire.
Common problem.
Yeah. So the how can be very different, but there are a few methodological frameworks. But the easiest way is try to make it visible, tangible. Okay. You can just role play. That would be the easiest way. Okay. Let's imagine, how would our company deliver what we do today in that world? What would change? And just start with a basic role play. You can go to Lego. Today we have AI. It's just amazing to prototype things. But there's a lot of creativity on the side of the designer to imagine what would be the best experience for my customer to fully grasp those insights and bring them in and start thinking about it. It will never work in a one afternoon workshop. People have to sleep on it, digest it. You need to show them different, evidence. You need to bring different sensorial aspects of the experience, show them objects so that they can start composing this new possible future. Because if on one side we're very bad at projecting ourselves in the future, we still are very good at time travel. It's something we know how to do. And there are techniques where you can try to project yourself in the future and try to imagine how does it feel. You know, how do you experience that future? Now, one very key aspect, and I just want to catch something that you said, positive, less positive future. I often say that positive futures have collapsed. You can ask people around you, when was the last time that you read a book, watched a movie, watched a series, played a game, set in a utopian, positive future where you would say, oh my God, I want me and my kids and my grandkids to live in that future. Usually people can't answer you. If you ask, what was the last dystopian thing you saw? They have so much example to give. And that is a key aspect of our relationship with the future, is that we are using forecasting, foresight, as a way of criticizing the present. Whereas it's interesting, but it's a little bit, you know, the snake eating its own tail, because it doesn't produce any concrete transformation. You know, I'm a Marxist, so I don't want to go there. But we need to leverage our ability to use foresight and paint in people's mind futures where they would go like, interesting. Okay. Now, maybe for businesses, it's more difficult because in a business environment, the question of the future tends to be limited to technology. And so the bias of technological determinism is very strong. There's a strong neoliberal belief that technology drives progress, and people lack the ability to even name social phenomena. And I see this with designers as well. You do social innovation programs, you send designers looking at the situation, investigate, inquire, and because they lack a few basic tools about sociology and anthropology, they are blind to the social situation. So they only see problems to solve with technology. The worst is desirability, consumer preference, feasibility, technological determinism, and viability. You know, will it survive in the market? And you already have those neoliberal, you know, goggles, and you're stuck. So if you want to open up the future and think, how could the future be different? You need to also free yourself and part of your design, I would say, toolbox from certain assumptions that will help you really well to help a client solve a business problem. But if you zoom out and you look at society, different generations, different cultures, different time scales, maybe looking at the world only with the glasses of a merchant might not help you. Okay, and you will fail at understanding how society changes. Okay.
I think it's extremely interesting because you're giving us here already one of the rules of thumb. You know that I really love these very simple ideas where, you know, for example, in business, where you say, hey, put your money in two different envelopes, you know, family stuff in one, business stuff in the other. Basic idea, but if you apply it very well, it saves a lot of problems, you know. And here you're touching one, which is one of the principles that I hear from you is one which is, don't look at the world only just from the prism of business. Will there be other such simple rules that you would tell to service designers, hey, these are things that would help you to slowly get more into a strategic foresight mindset? Like tiny changes, you know, like, oh, if you do that, this would help you to think a bit more like a strategic designer.
I would say mainly diversify your sources of information about the world and start collecting signals. That's the number one thing I would recommend people, is to be a patient, dedicated archivist and have a database, have a like raindrop and motion, but use something where you can pull out your data and look at it again, connect things, and be able to rely on something meaningful for your research. Because if you always start from scratch, it's hard. That would be the first thing is you need to have an organized process for managing signals. Okay.
And where do I get these signals?
Oh, it's very interesting. You will have signals from everywhere. Okay. So you go to a dinner party and someone tells you something, you capture. You can go online and you use media. It can be journalism, it can be documentaries. But I would say don't only rely on data coming from the internet. Okay. Rely on what people write in books. Okay. That helps a lot. And then if you understand design research, observe people, try to make sense of how people do things differently, pay attention to young people, new behaviors, be in this mode of being attentive to the world, and then travel, I would say, travel. Thinking about the future requires to understand maybe how people in China relate to technology, how people in Africa relate to the mobile phone, how people in a third world country will use cash. Because you need to nourish your ability to think about social phenomena, their interaction with technology, and how things change. And then another thing you can do is start to write down your assumptions about the future and go back to it after 1 year, after 2 years. And if you do this for 10 years, you sharpen your ability not to make predictions, but really good bets. Okay, that helps a lot. But first, I would say, remember, if you have only one future, you're a bit trapped. You're probably living in someone else's future, we say. It's not yours. And it's often this very idealistic, future, cities, skyscrapers, flying cars, everybody almost eternal, no work, robots. This is a very outdated view of the future. And you would be then able to spot in maybe video games or, for example, a movie like Black Panther. Wakanda has a city. It's a very interesting urban concept. There's things, there's the real, I would say, ideas about how a city could be different. And you can start, writing down what you observe, how you feel about it, what it means for you. So a futurist documents and collects things a lot. That's a key principle.
It reminds me, you said you were a graphic designer before.
Yeah, I still am in my heart.
And I was too. And in graphic design, we had this thing where we collect. There was a big collection thing that, oh, this logo, I love it. Oh, this font, I love it.
Inspiration.
Inspiration boards, and you create a mood board. So it feels to me it has a bit this curiosity, of whatever I see could be a signal. And especially if it's not just something from the internet, it's a conversation, it's a weird observation I make in the train from listening to a conversation between two teenagers and then, oh, wow, this is interesting how they try to solve a problem in that way. Okay, that's interesting. And I really like this idea of testing yourself, and getting in the habit of, oh, I can already be a strategic foresight guy by writing a few bets and basically send them to myself in the future and then see, hey, oh, okay. Now I received an email from myself in the past, and was I wrong about how I thought this would happen or the possibilities? That's pretty neat. And may I ask, I see we're already half in our time, which is good, because now I think the idea of what strategic foresight, we slowly get there, and I think people get a good idea of that. But there are curious people in that room, and we have some books here.
Yeah.
Could you just point maybe one or two of the resources? You said this idea that it's not just on the internet, and
Yeah.
You brought books. Which are the resources that you would recommend to someone in service design, curious enough? Can be books, can be people to follow, can be things to do.
So, yeah. When I started getting really interested in foresight, because we speak French, so I had La Prospective, which is the French version.
Yeah.
And it's a bit more humanistic, social, asking big question: what is mobility tomorrow? What if skateboard would redefine bakery? You know, sort of creative questions. But there were a few people that really inspired me. One of them was Noah Rafford. He now works in Dubai. He's behind, I think, the Museum of the Future there. And I got into conversation a little bit with him, but his blog helped me a lot. There was someone called Scott Smith who came up with the concept of flat back futures. So this idea of corporate videos showing us the future, everything works, everybody's beautiful, there's holograms everywhere, you can touch everything, and information is available, and everything works seamlessly. So he really developed this idea of critical foresight. And we try to unpack a little bit the stories we tell ourselves in the business world about the future, and how actually instead of orienting us or helping us navigate the future, they actually send us in the wrong direction. And there are a few interesting people that you can find. Scott Smith wrote a very nice book. I didn't take it, but I recommend it. You can find it on his website. It changes. I think it's a very nice intro. I would say at the intersection of foresight and design, there is the discipline of speculative design, which you could do a whole podcast on, but that's maybe the book that everybody has on the topic. It's a good way.
Speculative Everything, Design Fiction, and Social Reading by Anthony Dewey and Fiona Webb.
It's a must-have, I guess. And if you really like that, that's my Bible. So this one is really the academic Bible on critical thinking for futurists and speculative designers.
Okay, so that's
Splendid.
Discursive Design, Critical, Speculative, and Alternative Things by Bruce M. Thrapp and Stephanie M. Thrapp.
Yeah. A lot of R&D labs tend to now request speculative prototyping.
Okay.
In order to create spaces within the company that open up this idea of the future, and people can manipulate, people can talk, people can envision. Well, oh, that's very different. That is something I can touch. It makes me think of, and open up. Yeah. There are other books. I love cities. But, for example, that's a book I would recommend if you think about different scales in design. We're not always into graphic design or form and function or services and systems, but really high level urban systems. Interesting concepts. Helps you set the stage for your future scenarios. It helps you describe the society in which your service will take place. This one's really good. Lanoon is the publisher, and it's the Future City, Visionary Urban Architecture and Design. Great one. That is a bit nerdy, but a lot of people, I mentioned Noah Rafford. Some people know Vinay Gupta with the Exayurt. That's 100 essays about the future. So that's probably one of the most interesting collections of let's open up the scope. How could be the future different? What could happen? This one will...
the future we deserve.
Yeah, the future we deserve. Tricky title. This one might be very interesting for service designers. Very short method and set of tools to approach the future. Very easy to go through. not too hard to access, I would say. It's called the Extrapolation Factory Operator's Manual. And it has English and Chinese, which is not only beautiful, but interesting.
Yeah, indeed. So a good starting point.
Yeah.
So we have a Bible, we have a good starting
I
point.
want to give some
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
I didn't want to take the usual books about methods. I'm sure you find them easily if you go on Amazon.
Yeah, just Google.
Use Amazon to find the books and then order them from your local bookstore, please. That one is in French. Le pouvoir des imaginaires. It's really about, how this imagination is very personal. Imaginaries is more social, more collective. And this one is an interesting book on how to easily pull some levers to shape how we engage and interact in the future. And I would really recommend this one, which is a critique of the Anthropocene and the sort of visual grammar we use to represent the Anthropocene. And while we try to be critical of the Anthropocene, we end up reproducing everything that is as explored. So that's a very good book, but very nerdy and very on the left. So we need to enjoy that type of stuff, but very critical and easy to read quite fast. You read in Monday.
Thanks so much.
That's a few books.
I'll take a picture of it and we'll share it then with the audience with a few links.
And if people really want, like, give me methods, we can do that.
That's good. That's good. We will see that in the questions. And that brings me, I see Federico already has put links in the chat for the books. So thank you so much for that. So that's a really good job. And I would like now, maybe you ask if people want this, I can also share that. Maybe now is a good time to look a little bit more at what the community wants. So don't hesitate to now go in the chat and write your questions. I'm going to go back in the chat to see if there are questions.
How many people do we have?
So we have right now, let me check. We have 20 people still. So we have some very, how do you say that? Fidèle. Loyal people, started with 20 and still 20. So let me check if we have a few questions, because I always have dozens of questions for you, but I think it's always lovely to have the questions from people. And why we'll get there, first question is, could we get the list via email? Yes, at the end, I'll send a picture of all the books and stuff so that you can get it. So one question is, what are your thoughts on decolonizing design in relation to strategic foresight? How can we envision diverse and decolonized futures? Yes.
Wow, thank you to whoever wrote this. That's a key issue close to my heart. Obviously, the way we think about the future is often perceived from the perspective of white, straight dudes like me in the global north. The academic, I would say, writing on this topic is to say, if we ask indigenous people in the global south about the future, they laugh at us when we talk about dystopian, collapse and negative futures, because they say that's our present for the last 5 years. Okay. And I think there's a strong sense of humility here for us in our privileged, global north context of practicing design. And the most important aspect is, how do we bring in the voice of people who are usually left out from the conversation? Now, decolonizing doesn't necessarily require to go to Brazil, South Africa to do that. You have a lot of communities around you who are below the radar. So, for example, I participate in a lot of innovation programs around business schools and academia. And they always suggest that students work for a big company and do innovation for free for them in the hope that they get one day a job or some sort of visibility. If you take a decolonial lens, you will say, no. There's no way that big corporations should leverage the ideas of people in school for free. What about we use design to solve problems that are below the radar? So there might be a business around the corner run by a family from Pakistan. And the first thing would be not like show up and say, we want to solve a problem, but engage in a conversation with them, understand what's important for them, bring them in the process and design with them. So I think that's what I said about the merchant classes. We tend to overthink, how do we respond to the market? How do we please shareholders? How do we make ourselves look good to businesses because we want work, because we know we are on a job market, we know it's a capitalist, scheme. But as designers, we have the ability to shift our priorities a little bit and invite stakeholders to say, hey, a lot of people struggling just around us. Can we rebalance the way we approach just teaching innovation? Why should big corporations get all this for free? Shouldn't this go somewhere else? Shouldn't we help a small NGO? Shouldn't we help a small business owned by, I don't know, the Albanian community? And that is really close to my heart. I try to always bring that lens, but it's not always easy. But that's fundamental. That's really a very valid question, very interesting question. And I think that the more we find the ways to do it in a creative way, it doesn't have to be a revolutionary activist, in your face. We know the kind of reaction it triggers, but start to pivot a little bit and show that design is able to apprehend situations differently, and that you want to do social innovation, let's do it. So that's how I would answer. Then on your free time, go to what we call the global south. Really go. I left home when I was 17. I went to South Africa and Mozambique. I changed my life. And then what is fundamental here from a future study perspective is to engage with people who have a fundamentally different perspective of the future. In Africa, the future is very different. It's not that it doesn't exist, but it's shaped by a completely different paradigm. So in Asia, it will be different. And then you will learn more about how your perception of the future is shaped. For example, in French-speaking people, we have two words for the future, which is unique. We have le futur et l'avenir, which is two different things. Le future comes from the Latin verb to be. So in French, they say il fut. It's the same as futur. So we say, and that's Derrida, that the present conjugates the future. So there's a direct sort of verb connection. And l'avenir is further. It's deeper, more like Jung, archetypes, beasts and dragons and creatures. And then you can start building on the interaction between the two, whereas the future is constantly actualizing the present as a complex system. And then l'avenir is sort of this imaginary beast at the back that we take for granted. And there's a lot of unpacking to do there. And if you travel, if you go to other, really outside of the West, it will shape your perspective of the future in many ways. And you really have to be humble.
Basically, two things. One is it starts at home. It doesn't have to be something that you need to go somewhere else to make it happen. But then on your free time, go out. So it's kind of interesting. Is go home, start home, go out. And that's maybe cool. Thanks. We have Sophia who says, you mentioned AI to prototype futures. Can you tell us more about how and in what type of scenarios do you do this, and how do you and the rest of the team use these prototypes during the process?
Good question. So this is fairly new. I think ChatGPT, to be on the most popular version, is very good at generating ideas. It's very good at computing things. And I would, as a futurist, it's very important to add in your prompt, please add non-obvious ideas. Please suggest what you believe I might have missed, okay? Because we tend to think that we know what we know. I would say you don't know what you don't know. So ChatGPT can be a very good tool to fast track the generation. In Foresight, we work a lot with uncertainties. So you give me two uncertainties, I give you a 2x2 matrix, very basic. That's the level 1 white belt scenario approach. But an AI will do this so fast, so quickly. And the other way to use it is visually. I use Midjourney, is to use what comes out of ChatGPT and cross-reference with maybe your signals and maybe other things that you have. Started crafting images that can reveal where you want to, go with the scenario. But I would say do not use the AI to like do it for you. But the AI will help you generate and fast track. It's so powerful. And then, as you know, things happen by mistake. Sometimes they're very interesting. But I would say an AI is very good at making sure that you have a good literature review on certain key topics and that you do not forget some of the key aspects that are shaping your scenarios, especially on the social dimension. You can really ask the AI to reveal what is missing in your approach. I use it to like shed some light on my dead angles. Add what you see obvious that I might have forgotten. That is really helpful. Challenge me.
We had this conversation just before we started, but I think something that what I found interesting is your way to also have a conversation about this future with ChatGPT or another tool. I like how maybe can you elaborate on that element of, it's not just one prompt and it's done, but that you basically have it as a partner to improve, go further. So it's not I do version 1 of my prototype and it's my prototype.
That's good. One thing you can do when you work with ChatGPT is to say, before you output your answer, can you tell me what you understand about my request? And then you will see how the AI actually understands what you want. And then you will, oh my God, I'm missing this, or you didn't understand that, or it's interesting that you go there. So it's really a conversation with AI. And even in generating images, it's a conversation. What happens if I do that? What happens if I bring this reference? Oh, why? How? Change the light, change the reference. Sometimes saying that it happens in a city in Switzerland or it happens in a city in Africa, the image is fundamentally different. Something else happens. But like I said before, the AI has trouble. For example, if you want to create a car-free city, good luck with that. It doesn't know it. And if you write no cars, the car is so emphasized. There's going to be cars everywhere. It's like when you, in the first version of Midjourney, you said, with anatomically correct fingers, and there were fingers everywhere. It's not so relevant sometimes. So you need to find lateral ways of going where you want to go because very often you know where you want to go, what you want to create, and it's all about how to shape the prompts in order to reach what you want. For ChatGPT, I think it's very useful to bring in your research, all your notes together and ask it, what am I trying to do here? What is happening here? Help me make sense of all this data. Can you categorize everything I gave you? And then it clusters it for you. That's really helpful. And then you say, okay, you made this sort of affinity sorting. Could you do it in a different way? So it's really helping me in the divergent thinking side, not on the convergent thinking. Because you know how biased we are towards convergent thinking, and I want to use AI to rebalance my cognitive processes so that I amplify even more my divergent thinking.
Awesome. I see we're already at 18:54.
Yeah, 6 minutes left.
We're 6 minutes left. So what I will suggest is I'm going to do a bit of a summary with a few keywords, and you will be able to add the last one that you say, oh, this is a keyword that is missing, because we have a tradition in these webinars is that we finish exactly on time. So it's a bit of a mind game, looking at the watch and trying to be exactly on time. And what happens also is that after that, people know that they can go back to their kids and stuff. But for those who want to stay, we then have a bit of a non-recorded conversation, which is a bit more like a hangout. So I will do a bit of a summary. You can still go on with the questions, and we'll cover them in the more hangout phase right after. But so for me, the summary that I'm taking is thinking like we think about prototypes with an S, we think about futures with an S. Correct. I think that's one key learning that I take from our conversation. The other thing is we have this notion of, okay, but how do I do that? One thing to do this is collecting. It's having your Pinterest of signals, maybe less visual, but having your database of stuff that you say, oh, this is exciting, this is interesting. How can I use that? So there is this collection point of view. And then there is taking a weak signal, so something that is not yet so used or prevalent around the world, and say, oh, if I use this, and what if this will be normal? What if this will be everywhere? How will it change my service? How will it change experiences that people have? So it's looking at the world, collecting, taking one, trying it out, and doing it again, futures, and doing it many times. We have lovely books that we have here, and also this notion that it's not on the methods. The game is not so much on the methods. Obviously, we need them, but they're easy to find, and it's more the shift in thinking that is really the place that it has to happen. And then we have this element of decolonizing that we discussed also a bit, which we can say very practically, it starts at home, and then also to open up to the next parts of the world. And obviously, AI can be helpful. It's always in the conversation these times. But again, as you said, it's just a tool that helps us in the divergent way of thinking to imagine even more S's at the end of future. And I think that's a very lovely thing to see. What will be for you the last words, the last gifts that you'd like to share to the community as a little departure gift of, hey, this is my last magic wand that you can use?
That will be the paper to wrap the gift.
Yeah, all right.
Everything we talked about today fits into one category called future literacy. And being future literate is having the tools, the mindset in order to navigate the question of the future, and having those, opened up spaces of freedom, of expression, where you have agency and where you are not in someone else's future. It's your future. And maybe my last conclusion with the future is a social space. It's co-constructed, and it should not be the future I hope for, the positive futures and preferable futures I hope for, is that it's not a capitalist, neoliberal, destructive future, of course. So we can add a few scenarios when we do that, add a few ingredients in what we do, so to challenge people. Yeah, that's very important.
And bring the people with us.
Of course, always, not in your face. It's subtle.
Love it, love it. Thank you so much. Again, a big thank you to you, Pascal.
Thanks for the invitation.
We will hang out a few more minutes,
No
but
problem.
it's the tradition. We finish exactly on time and sometimes even 1 minute before. And that's exactly what we will do today to honor the Swiss style. And we'll hang out a little bit more. I see we have some little applauses that happen, and obviously I will give them back to you.
Thank you.
And we will now stop the recording. Wish everyone a lovely evening and a lovely time, and we'll transition to the more hangout moments of today. Again, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Pascal, for joining us today, for sharing so much with us, and for taking the time.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Cheers. Bye-bye.